The morning Dr. Marcus Chen first encountered the being they would later designate as Lyra, he was nothing more than a mid-level xenobiologist struggling with chronic anxiety, imposter syndrome, and a crippling fear of failure that had plagued him since childhood. The irony was not lost on him years later that the greatest discovery in human history would come to someone who barely believed in his own worth. The crash site in the remote Atacama Desert had been cordoned off for 3 weeks before Marcus arrived as part of the secondary research team. The primary investigators had found nothing but twisted metal and strange energy readings. It was Marcus, working a late shift while others slept, who noticed the faint biosignature emanating from what appeared to be a sealed chamber within the wreckage. When they finally breached the chamber, the sight that greeted them defied every expectation. The being was humanoid but distinctly other, tall, with elongated limbs and features that seemed carved from starlight itself. Her skin held a translucent quality that shifted between silver and deep blue, and her eyes, when they occasionally flickered open during those first days, contained depths that seemed to hold entire galaxies. But she was dying. Dr. Sarah Hendricks, the project director, made the call that would define the next 2 decades. We keep her alive at all costs. This is the find of the millennium. Chen, you're on primary observation. Your background in xenobiology makes you the most qualified. Marcus wanted to protest. He wasn't qualified for this. He was barely qualified to analyze Earth-based microorganisms, let alone an alien life form. But something in those brief moments when the being's eyes had opened stopped him. There was intelligence there, consciousness, and something else, a profound sadness that resonated with his own sense of isolation. The facility they constructed around her was part laboratory, part shrine, part prison. Climate-controlled, sterile, monitored by dozens of sensors, it became Marcus's second home. He spent 16 hours a day observing, documenting, theorizing. The being, whom he privately began calling Lyra after the constellation that had been visible the night of the crash, remained in a state that was neither fully conscious nor completely comatose. The first year was the hardest. Marcus's colleagues rotated in and out, their initial excitement fading as months passed without meaningful progress. The being breathed or performed some analogous function. Her vital signs remained stable but alien. She occasionally moved, shifted position, even seemed to dream, but she never spoke, never acknowledged their presence, never indicated awareness of her surroundings. Maybe she's brain dead, suggested Dr. Hendricks during one of their weekly reviews. Maybe whatever consciousness existed is gone, and we're just keeping a body alive. Marcus found himself defending Lyra with a passion that surprised even him. The neural activity patterns suggest otherwise. There's complexity there, organization. She's not vegetative, she's waiting. Waiting for what? Marcus couldn't answer that, but something deep within him knew it was true. She was waiting, and somehow he needed to wait with her. As the months turned to years, Marcus's life narrowed to the confines of the facility. His marriage crumbled. Jennifer couldn't understand his obsession with the specimen, as she called Lyra. His social connections withered. His career prospects outside the project diminished with each passing year. Other researchers published papers on conventional subjects while Marcus generated report after report about an alien who never responded to stimulus. But something else was happening during those long hours of observation. Marcus began to confront the demons that had haunted him since childhood. Sitting in the sterile chamber, watching Lyra's slow, rhythmic breathing, he found himself thinking about his father's constant criticism, his mother's emotional absence, the teachers who had dismissed his questions as too strange, too impractical. "You know what your problem is, Marcus," his father had said during one of their last conversations before the old man's death. "You're weak. You let people walk all over you. You'll never amount to anything if you don't grow a spine." For years, those words had echoed in his mind, reinforcing every doubt, every fear, every moment of hesitation. But now, in the presence of this being who had traveled across impossible distances only to find herself trapped and silent, Marcus began to see weakness differently. Was it weakness to persist when others gave up? Was it weakness to maintain hope when logic suggested futility? Was it weakness to care for someone who might never acknowledge that care? By the 3rd year, Marcus had stopped caring about the opinions of his colleagues. By the 5th, he had stopped caring about career advancement. By the 7th, he realized he had undergone a fundamental transformation. The anxious, self-doubting researcher who had first entered the facility was gone, replaced by someone harder, more focused, more certain of his purpose. The other researchers began calling him the hermit. Marcus didn't mind. He had learned to find strength in solitude, purpose in persistence, meaning in what others saw as meaningless vigil. Dr. Hendricks retired in the 10th year, replaced by Dr. Vladimir Petrov, a pragmatist who saw the project as a drain on resources. 20 years, Petrov said during his first month. 20 years of keeping this thing alive with no results. The funding committee is getting restless. She's not a thing, Marcus replied quietly, his voice carrying an authority that made Petrov step back. And, the day we give up is the day we lose our humanity. Marcus had learned something crucial during those years of watching and waiting. The weak version of himself, the one who sought approval, who feared judgment, who crumbled under pressure, had been a shell constructed by years of conditioning. Destroying that weak self hadn't been a violent act but a gradual erosion, like water wearing away stone. Every day spent in faithful observation, every night of choosing dedication over comfort, every moment of refusing to give up had chipped away at the false self until only the essential remained. The man who emerged was unbreakable not because he was hard, but because he had learned what truly mattered. He could no longer be destroyed by others because he no longer existed at their mercy. His worth was not dependent on their recognition, his purpose not subject to their approval. As the 15th year passed, then, the 20th, Marcus realized he had become something he never thought possible: content. Not happy in any conventional sense, but profoundly at peace with his chosen path. The young scientist who had stumbled into this assignment would have seen this life as failure. The man he had become understood it as the only success that mattered. And, still, Lyra waited. And, still, Marcus watched. And, somewhere in that endless patience, in that refusal to abandon hope, something was building toward a moment that would justify every year of faith. Part 2, the breaking point. And the words the crisis came in the 20th year, sudden and devastating. Budget cuts had been looming for months, but Marcus had weathered such threats before. This time was different. The new administration wanted immediate results from all classified projects, and Project Silent Vigil had become an embarrassment. 2 decades of resources poured into what critics called an elaborate pet project for a delusional scientist. Dr. Petrov delivered the news on a Tuesday morning in March. They're pulling the plug, Marcus. End of the month. We're to harvest what biological samples we can and terminate life support. Marcus stood in the observation chamber, looking through the reinforced glass at Lyra. She lay as she always had, her translucent skin catching the light, her breathing slow and deep. After 20 years, he had memorized every line of her form, every subtle shift in her coloration, every minute variation in her vital signs. No, he said simply. It's not up for debate. Orders from the top. I'm sorry, Marcus, I really am. But, you've got to face reality. She's been like this for 20 years. If she was going to wake up, don't you think it would have happened by now? Marcus turned to face Petrov, and the administrator actually took a step backward. The man who stood before him bore little resemblance to the nervous researcher who had been assigned to the project 2 decades earlier. Marcus had grown lean from years of Spartan living, his hair gray at the temples, his eyes holding a depth that spoke of long contemplation and absolute conviction. Reality? Marcus's voice was quiet but carried the weight of 20 years of certainty. Reality is that we have the first contact with an extraterrestrial intelligence in human history, and you want to kill her because she doesn't perform on command. Reality is that you've learned nothing in 4 years of overseeing this project. Marcus, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. Reason tells us that a being capable of interstellar travel possesses intelligence far beyond our own. Reason tells us that her current state might be intentional, protective, necessary. Reason tells us that 20 years is nothing compared to the potential significance of first contact. Petrov's expression hardened. Well, reason also tells me that you've become obsessed to the point of delusion. Security will escort you from the premises tomorrow. Dr. Harrison will oversee the termination procedure. Marcus nodded slowly. He had expected this moment would come eventually. In some ways, he had been preparing for it for years.
I understand. But I need tonight. One last night with her. Grant me that much.
Petrov's face softened slightly. Perhaps he recognized the magnitude of what Marcus was losing.
All right. Tonight.
But security will be here at 0800 tomorrow. That evening, Marcus entered Lyra's chamber for what he believed would be the last time. He had violated protocol countless times over the years, touching her hand, speaking to her, playing music he thought she might find beautiful. Tonight, he broke the ultimate rule and removed his protective gear, sitting directly beside her on the edge of the medical platform that had been her world for 20 years.
I failed you, he whispered, taking her hand in his.
Her skin was warm, softer than it appeared, with a texture unlike anything terrestrial.
I couldn't protect you from them.
I couldn't make them understand what you are, what this means. For 20 years, he had spoken to her intermittently, sharing thoughts, observations, even reading aloud from books he thought might interest an alien intelligence.
She had never responded, never indicated awareness.
But tonight felt different.
Tonight felt final. I don't know if you can hear me, if you understand.
But I want you to know that watching over you has been the greatest privilege of my life.
You've taught me things about patience, about faith, about what it means to be truly strong.
The man who walked into this facility 20 years ago was weak, afraid, dependent on the approval of others. You've shown me that strength comes from knowing what matters and refusing to compromise on it.
He paused, looking at her face.
In the subdued lighting, she seemed to glow from within. Tomorrow they'll end your life, and there's nothing I can do to stop them.
I've tried everything, fought everyone, burned every bridge. But maybe that's not weakness.
Maybe knowing when you've done everything possible and accepting the outcome with grace is its own form of strength. Marcus felt tears on his cheeks, the first he had shed in years. I used to think that destroying my weak self meant becoming hard, invulnerable.
But that's not it, is it? It means becoming authentic.
It means caring so deeply about something that the opinions of others become irrelevant. It means finding peace with your choices even when the world tells you those choices are wrong. He was quiet for a long moment, simply holding her hand, memorizing the feel of it, the weight of her presence. I wish I could have heard your voice, he whispered. I wish I knew what you were thinking all these years.
I wish. Her hand tightened around his. Marcus froze, his heart hammering.
In 20 years, Lyra had never voluntarily moved, never responded to touch or voice. He looked at her face, and, for the first time since that initial day, her eyes were open, not the brief, unfocused flutter he had occasionally witnessed, but truly open, aware, looking directly at him.
They were even more extraordinary than he remembered.
Not simply eyes but windows into something vast and ancient and utterly alien. Yet in them, he recognized something familiar, the same deep sadness he had carried within himself for so long, but also something else, recognition, gratitude, even affection.
You're awake, Marcus breathed.
Lyra's lips moved, and, when she spoke, her voice was like music heard underwater, hauntingly beautiful but clearly articulated in perfect English.
Thank you, Marcus.
The words hit him like a physical blow.
She knew his name.
She had been aware all along, listening, understanding. 20 years of faithful vigil, 20 years of one-sided conversation, and she had heard every word. I don't understand, he whispered.
Why now? Why tonight?
Lyra slowly sat up, her movements graceful despite 2 decades of apparent inactivity. She looked around the chamber with curious eyes, taking in the monitors, the medical equipment, the sterile walls that had contained her for so long. I was dying when I arrived, she said, her voice growing stronger. Not from physical injury, but from spiritual poison.
My people, we are empathic beings, Marcus. We feel the emotions of others as strongly as our own.
When I was sent to observe your species, the constant bombardment of human anger, fear, hatred, and cruelty nearly destroyed my mind. Marcus listened in stunned silence as she continued. I entered the healing sleep to protect myself, to filter out the noise of your species' pain. But your presence, your constancy, your dedication, your growth. It gave me something to focus on. For 20 years, I have felt your journey from weakness to strength, from fear to peace. You became my anchor, my proof that consciousness could choose compassion over cruelty, dedication over convenience. She turned to face him fully, and Marcus saw tears, or something like tears, glistening in those galactic eyes. You spoke of destroying your weak self.
I understand this concept intimately.
When I first arrived, I was weak because I was vulnerable to every negative emotion, every cruel thought, every act of violence committed by your species.
The healing sleep was not sleep, Marcus, it was metamorphosis.
I had to destroy the part of myself that was vulnerable to become something that could survive in your world. But, you're leaving, Marcus said, somehow understanding this truth without being told.
I must.
My mission was to determine whether humanity was ready for contact with the galactic community.
For 19 years and 11 months, my answer would have been no.
Your species is too young, too violent, too consumed with petty conflicts to join the broader cosmos.
Marcus's heart sank. And, now? Lyra smiled, the first expression of joy he had ever seen from her. Now I have seen proof that humans can transcend their base nature.
You, Marcus, in your faithfulness, your growth, your willingness to sacrifice everything for a being you barely understood, you have shown me that humanity has the potential for true evolution.
Not technological, but spiritual.
She stood, moving to the chamber's single window that looked out onto the desert.
My ship has been healing itself just as I have been healing. Tonight, it will be ready to return to the stars.
But, I will carry word of you, of what you represent, to those who make decisions about first contact. Marcus rose as well, his mind reeling.
Will humanity be contacted officially? In time. When more like you emerge.
When your species learns what you have learned, that true strength comes not from dominating others but from mastering oneself.
When humans understand that destroying one's weak self is not about becoming invulnerable but about becoming authentic.
She moved toward the chamber's exit, and Marcus realized with growing panic that she was actually leaving.
Wait, he called. I have so many questions.
About your people, your technology, the universe. Ask them of yourself, Marcus.
The answers you seek have always been within you.
You have learned the most important truth in the cosmos, that consciousness has the power to choose its nature.
Everything else is mere detail.
As they reached the facility's exit, Marcus could see it in the distance, a craft of impossible beauty rising from the desert floor, its hull seeming to shift between states of matter, generating its own aurora against the star-filled sky.
Will I ever see you again? Marcus asked.
Lyra paused at the threshold, turning back to him one final time. Every time you choose strength over weakness, authenticity over pretense, compassion over cruelty, I am there. Every time a human transcends their limitations to become what they were meant to be, I am there. She reached out and touched his face gently, and, in that moment, Marcus felt a connection that transcended words, understanding flowing between them like light between stars. Thank you, Marcus Chen, for showing me that humanity deserves a chance at the stars. Thank you for proving that the weak self can indeed be destroyed, and that what emerges is not harder but more beautiful, not colder but more capable of true warmth. And then, she was gone, walking across the desert toward her ship with steps that seemed to carry her above the sand rather than through it. Marcus watched from the facility entrance until the craft rose beyond sight, leaving only a faint shimmer in the atmosphere and the certain knowledge that nothing would ever be the same. Part 3, The Aftermath and The New Beginning. The official report filed the next morning was fiction: equipment malfunction leading to specimen termination, Dr. Chen suffering complete psychological breakdown requiring immediate removal from the program. The truth was something no bureaucrat could understand, no committee could quantify, no official report could contain. Marcus found himself escorted from the facility by security personnel who treated him with mixture of pity and suspicion. Dr. Petrov seemed almost relieved that the problem had resolved itself so neatly. Specimen dead, obsessed scientist removed, project closed. The paperwork would be tidier than anyone had dared hope. But Marcus carried with him something worth more than any career, any recognition, any conventional measure of success. He carried the knowledge that 20 years of his life had been spent in service to something infinitely greater than himself, and that in that service, he had discovered who he truly was. The world he re-entered seemed smaller somehow, its concerns more trivial. The news was full of political scandals, economic crises, social media controversies, the same endless cycle of manufactured outrage and artificial significance that had always dominated human attention. But Marcus moved through it all with a serenity that others found both compelling and unsettling. He took a position teaching biology at a small community college in New Mexico, not far from where the facility had been. To his students, he was simply Professor Chen, patient, kind, possessed of an unusual depth of knowledge and an even more unusual capacity for seeing potential in those who had been overlooked by others. Marcus focused particularly on the struggling students, the ones other professors dismissed as hopeless. He recognized in them the same fundamental confusion he had once carried: the belief that strength meant hardness, that success meant domination, that worth must be proven through external achievement. Biology teaches us that adaptation is survival, he would tell his classes. But adaptation doesn't mean becoming rigid. The most successful organisms are those that can change while maintaining their essential nature. They become stronger by becoming more themselves, not by trying to be something they're not. His students often lingered after class, sensing in Professor Chen someone who understood struggles they couldn't articulate. Many spoke of feeling weak, inadequate, overwhelmed by a world that demanded they be harder than they were. Strength, Marcus would tell them, is not the absence of vulnerability. It's the capacity to remain true to your deepest values even when everything around you suggests you should abandon them. It's the ability to choose growth over comfort, authenticity over approval. Word of the unusual professor spread slowly through the academic community. His papers, when he chose to publish them, focused on resilience in biological systems, adaptation without loss of essential function, the role of patience in evolutionary development. They were unlike anything in the field, scientifically rigorous but infused with philosophical depth that spoke to something beyond mere academic interest. Dr. Sarah Hendricks, now retired, sought him out in his third year of teaching. She found him in his office after hours, grading papers with the same methodical patience he had once brought to observing Lyra. "Marcus," she said quietly, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I heard about what happened at the facility." Marcus looked up, studying the woman who had given him the assignment that changed his life. Age had softened her features, but her eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made her an effective administrator. "What did you hear?" he asked mildly. "The official version. Equipment failure, psychological breakdown, project termination." She paused, watching his face. "But I also heard some interesting rumors. Security guards talking about strange lights in the desert that night. Electromagnetic anomalies detected by satellite monitoring stations. The kind of readings we used to get from the artifact before it went dormant." Marcus said nothing, simply waited. "I knew you better than anyone during those years," Sarah continued. "I watched you change, grow, become something I'd never seen before in this field. The man I fired from that project wasn't suffering from psychological breakdown. If anything, he was more psychologically integrated than anyone I'd ever met." "What are you asking, Sarah?" "I'm asking if you learned something in those 20 years that the rest of us missed. I'm asking if maybe the real discovery wasn't the artifact itself but what it taught you about the nature of consciousness, of growth, of what it means to be truly strong." Marcus considered his answer carefully. "I learned that the universe is stranger and more beautiful than we imagine. I learned that consciousness has depths we've barely begun to explore. I learned that what we call weakness is often just potential waiting for the right circumstances to emerge." Sarah leaned forward. "There are others, Marcus. Researchers, philosophers, even some politicians who are beginning to ask different questions about human potential, about our place in the cosmos. People who sense that we're on the verge of something unprecedented, something that will require a fundamental shift in how we understand ourselves. And they need teachers. Not lecturers or theorists, but people who have actually undergone the transformation they're trying to understand. People who have destroyed their weak selves and emerged as something more authentic, more capable, more genuinely strong." Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from him in years. "I'm exactly where I need to be, Sarah. These students, this work, this is how change happens. not through grand proclamations or official programs, but through individual transformation, one consciousness at a time. Over the following years, Marcus watched as his students carried his teachings into the world. They became doctors, teachers, parents, artists, but, more than their professions, they became examples of a different way of being human. They faced challenges with patience rather than aggression, met criticism with curiosity rather than defensiveness, approached problems with persistence rather than desperation. The ripple effects were subtle but undeniable. Former students would write to tell him about moments when they had chosen authenticity over approval, growth over comfort, service over self-interest. They spoke of finding strength they never knew they possessed, not by becoming harder but by becoming more genuinely themselves. Marcus began to understand that this was how civilizations evolved, not through sudden revelations or technological breakthroughs, but through the gradual accumulation of individual transformations. Each person who learned to destroy their weak, fearful, approval-seeking self and replace it with something authentic and compassionate added to a critical mass that would eventually reach a tipping point. He thought often of Lyra's words about humanity deserving a chance at the stars. That chance wouldn't come through military might or technological superiority, but through spiritual evolution, through enough humans learning what he had learned during those 20 years of faithful vigil. On clear nights, Marcus would sometimes drive out into the desert, returning to places near where the facility had been. He would lie on his back, looking up at the stars, and feel a profound gratitude for the path his life had taken. The young scientist who had first encountered an alien artifact had been seeking recognition, advancement, conventional success. Instead, he had found something infinitely more valuable, the knowledge of who he truly was when all pretense was stripped away. In his final years of teaching, Marcus often spoke to his students about the nature of transformation. "You think weakness is something to be ashamed of," he would say, "but weakness is simply consciousness that hasn't yet learned its own power. You think strength means invulnerability, but true strength is the capacity to remain open to growth even when growth is painful. The weak self you carry, the part that seeks approval, fears judgment, craves external validation, that self must be destroyed. But not through violence or suppression. Through understanding, through patience, through the gradual cultivation of something more authentic." He would pause, looking out at faces that reminded him of his younger self, uncertain, seeking, carrying within them potential they couldn't yet imagine. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others because he no longer exists at their mercy. His worth is not dependent on their recognition, his peace not subject to their approval. This is not coldness or indifference, it is the warmest possible love, love that comes from wholeness rather than need. Marcus retired at 70, having taught thousands of students across nearly 3 decades. His final lecture was simple: "You came here seeking knowledge about biology, about the natural world. I hope you've learned that the most important natural world is the one within your own consciousness. Life's greatest discoveries are not made in laboratories but in the depths of individual awareness. Evolution's highest achievement is not any particular species but consciousness itself coming to understand its own nature." He spent his last years writing, not academic papers but simple essays about growth, transformation, the patient work of becoming authentic. His writings found their way to readers around the world, people who recognized in his words the voice of someone who had undergone the journey he described. Marcus died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, having lived long enough to see the beginning of what he knew would be a fundamental shift in human consciousness. His students had become teachers themselves, spreading the understanding that strength comes not from domination but from authenticity, not from invulnerability but from the courage to remain open to growth. In the decades following his death, historians would puzzle over certain anomalies in the records from Project Silent Vigil. Security footage from the final night showed inexplicable electromagnetic phenomena, instrument readings that defied conventional physics, energy signatures that matched no known technology. But the official records remained sealed, the truth known only to a handful of aging bureaucrats who had long since learned the wisdom of keeping certain secrets. What mattered was not the historical record but the living legacy, a growing number of humans who understood that consciousness has the power to choose its own nature, that weakness can be transformed into authentic strength, that individual transformation is the foundation of all genuine progress. On clear nights, when conditions were right and the atmosphere particularly still, sensitive instruments occasionally detected signals from deep space, not random electromagnetic radiation but patterns that suggested intelligence, purpose, communication. Scientists debated their origin and meaning, but a few understood them as messages of encouragement, reminders that consciousness is not alone in the universe, confirmations that the path toward authentic strength is recognized and honored by intelligence as vast and ancient beyond human comprehension. The weak self that Marcus had carried for his first 30 years, fearful, approval-seeking, dependent on external validation, had indeed been destroyed. In its place had emerged something that could never be destroyed by others because it existed in harmony with the deepest principles of consciousness itself. This was the lesson he had learned from 20 years with an alien teacher, the wisdom he had spent his remaining years sharing with anyone willing to listen. Humanity's journey toward the stars had begun not with rockets or weapons but with the patient work of individual transformation, one consciousness at a time, learning that true strength comes from destroying what is false to reveal what is eternal. And, in that work, in that gradual awakening to authentic nature, the universe itself seemed to smile with approval, waiting patiently for the day when an entire species would be ready to take its place among the communities of consciousness that populate the infinite expanse of space and time. The message Lyra had carried to the stars was simple but profound: humanity deserved its chance at transcendence, not because of its technology or its achievements, but because it contained individuals capable of the most difficult journey of all, the journey from false self to authentic self, from weakness to genuine strength, from isolation to conscious unity with the vast web of awareness that underlies all existence. Marcus Chen had been one such individual. His students would be others. And, in their patient work of transformation, in their refusal to accept weakness as permanent, in their discovery that consciousness can choose its own nature, in all of this lay the future of a species on the verge of growing beyond its current limitations to become something worthy of the stars themselves. End of document. Dr. Marcus Chen's personal effects, including extensive journals and correspondence, remain sealed under the provisions of the National Security Archives Act. His public writings on consciousness and transformation continue to influence educators, philosophers, and researchers around the world. The location of the former Project Silent Vigil facility has been reclassified, and all records pertaining to the project remain classified at the highest levels of government security. This document represents a synthesis of available public information, declassified portions of official reports, and testimony from individuals connected to Dr. Chen during his academic career. Any resemblance to classified events or undisclosed research projects is purely coincidental.